We come to the 13th presentation. For this year, the investigation is the Parayana, which is the way across. It's the higher way. What it is higher than, it is higher than the cycle of nature. That the cycle of nature has space-time for our world for tens of thousands of years, and for millions of years before that, and for billions of years before that, rooted in a natural cycle, which in more recent millions of years has become 4 seasons for the temperate areas of the planet. And so the quality of 4 seasons becomes a constituent part of human culture, especially over the last several 100,000 years. And certainly there, by the time that Homo erectus 2 million years ago was able to travel enormous distances on the planet, usually confined to the continent of Africa, but spreading eventually out of Africa and going very far afield in terms of the Eurasian continent. In what is today Ethiopia, Lake Turkana area, a skeleton of a Homo erectus young man, probably in his late teens, was discovered, and there is a beautiful monograph on it academically by Richard M. Leakey, the son of Mary and L.S.B. Leakey, one of the sons. And he was almost 6 feet tall and had the skeletal structure of a track star and lived some almost 2 million years ago. So that the hominid clad, as it were, is very, very ancient, and we go back millions of years in layers, in stages before that. And all of this comes into a mysterious quality when our particular species begins to refine itself out of what apparently were a pair of hominid precursors to us, the Neanderthal, Homo neanderthalis, and a newly discovered hominid species called Denisova, from the cave at Denisova in the Siberian part of Russia. And these two had split from each other apparently hundreds of thousands of years before there was any development of our particular refinement of the Homo species, and that is before Homo sapiens came into play about 200,000 years ago. The Denisovian population of hominids and the Neanderthals had split off some 100 or 200,000 years before then, and of course go back hundreds of thousands of years in a precursor hominid species, so that we have been prepared for a very long time, but only recently discovered. No one knew anything about ancient man until 1856, when Neanderthal, in the Neander River Valley, a skeleton was found and eventually became the Neanderthal man. And of course, this was an individual that was crippled by arthritic conditions. And so Neanderthals got the stereotype of the caveman who is hunched over and obviously wearing animal skins and carrying a club and dragging a mate by the hair into the cave. And that this somehow was the kind of Darwinian look at the primitive, bestial, animal nature of man. And this is not true at all. There are human beings all over the planet that have DNA, and that DNA includes segments from Neanderthal ancestors who mated with Homo sapien ancestors. Not only tens, but hundreds, couple 100,000 years ago. So that it's imperative for us to begin to learn that everything is new in the sense that it is a new past. It is a new past on every level of comprehension that you can imagine, and on many levels of encompassing that you cannot imagine because they're not imaginable, but they are creatable by refinement, by learning. And so the quality of civilization from here on forward, from here on out, is a learning civilization, which includes, as a tuning fork, the new past and the future. And by doing an H.G. Wells convolution of that ratio, we say the future and the new past. The future and the new past are given what glibly is called a quantum entanglement now by the continuity of understanding time as a dimension. Without understanding time as the first dimension, we do not begin with the right foot on any kind of a path, much less discovering that the path is within a field and that there are several fields in the cosmos. And so it isn't a path so much, but it's a way. And I use the Sanskrit word for way as yana, because the first time that yana was brought into play as given a way was by the historical Buddha in several of his deliverances, in his presentations 2,500 years ago. And one of them was a set of 16 called at that time the Parayana, as a set, as a harmonic of these 16. And out of this came the understanding by the historical Buddha, because of very much a refined, high Dharma way, that there is a unit, there is an atom of thought by which thought operates. And that atomic structure of thought is called a citta, C-I-T-T-A in Sanskrit, a citta. And that there is such a thing that opens up the entire continuity of time to a mind, a symbolic thought structure that is able to work with, utilize, create with, remembering with a bodhicitta. The moment, the atom of thought that there is a freedom, an enlightenment, whereby one can now begin to have a different quality of mind, a different quality of the structure of symbolic thought, and that the difference is that the invisible now becomes seeable, not in terms of perception, not in terms of perception, even integral to conception, but that one sees through like a window, like an open doorway, like a gate. One sees through to a vision in terms of the continuity of time, where the future and the new past are not severed by a fictitious present. There is no present moment. And by understanding that, the bodhicitta becomes capable of generating the thought that there is a freedom completely, because there are dimensions beyond. There are dimensions beyond the four dimensions, like the four seasons of nature. And that quality, in one of the most powerful 21st century theories of cosmology, in string theory, is called quintessence. And that quintessence is the scientific, theoretical name now for the fifth dimension, like the movable thumb that allows for man at last, as a species, to have the creative hand, the remembering calibration by which he, she, they can be free. For the first time in this world, really, truly, high dharmically free. It is difficult at this particular time, because it is emerging, the British phrase is pell-mell. It is coming out like a gusher. And there is no way to utilize it whatsoever. It's just a gusher. We're presenting the way, the Parayana, by which one can begin to see that this gusher has not only usable energy, but it has usable vision. It has the resonances and the sets of resonances and the harmonic, analytic, and the aesthetic beauty of the future and the new past, of the continuity of civilization as being the flower, the rose, the lotus of a humane civilization where men and women participate tuned together in the sense that they are an entangled gender pairedness that has its differentiation of not just two genders, but of many qualities of genders. And this comes out just the last day or so on the web, in the net. This is the Daily Galaxy, and this is March 28th of 2014. And it reads here, quantum vacuum powers the dark energy driving our universe. Quantum energy powers the dark energy, but its quantum vacuum powers the dark energy driving our universe. The energy can be and needs to be understood as time. That is not a dark energy. It is a high dharma time that is the dynamic of the way in which that gusher occurs. And that gusher occurs constantly, including what glibly is called the Big Bang. And that the universe has a dynamis. It has a dynamic, and the dynamic has a creativity to it. And the creativity is not some kind of made up or hocus pocus, but its creativeness is that once time emerges spontaneously as a dimension from a zero field of nature. Now, a zero field is a perfect zero field, and the term vacuum refers to something that is reduced so far that one can not detect analytically any further down the line. And we have come, by late March of 2014, to be able to peer analytically to 1/trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second in clock time. When you write that down, you write 10 with 32 zeros. 10 to the 32nd power. We can analytically refine that far, and when we do, and it was just released by the Harvard-Smithsonian investigation, astronomical, cosmological crew, that at that split second of a split second of a split second, we're talking about splits of trillions, there were already gravity waves. And the gravity waves have a special analytic shapedness that is called the B mode. And the B mode is that of a pinwheel. So that when time comes into play spontaneously from a zero field more perfect than a vacuum, it brings with it into the now zero field become an emergence gateway, an emergence portal, an emergence into a universe that instantly, because now there is time, no matter that it's a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, nevertheless, there is time, and it instantly creates the blossoming of three-dimensional space. And that three-dimensional space is intimately connected with time as a, quote, dark energy, and the space becomes a dark matter, quote, unquote. So that when one looks at early 20th century developments of Einstein's relativity concerning space-time as a fabric, and that its curvature is all about gravitation, of gravity, or of the development almost concurrently of what became quantum mechanics, one begins to understand. We are approaching April 1st, 2014, getting very close to a no fooling me day. No fool's day. Just a few days away. We have to understand that it is profound. It is the profundity of the profound, as Lao Tzu says. And so it is a mystery within a mystery within a mystery that is encompassed by a silence, yet sound can be heard out of that, and that the first wave resonance of that is gravitation. Gravity waves, and what do? They integrate. They pull together. But they pull together in such a way that while they spontaneously begin the integral of pulling together, they also instantly blossom a differential, which is the pinwheel B mode structuring. So that one has a cosmos which has an integral universe being born and birthed and conceived and fertilized by a differential quality that shows instantly that spontaneity has a child, which is instantaneousness. And so one has to be not only quick on the draw, one has to understand that you can't outdraw the spontaneous. And that it would be fool's errand. April Fool? No kidding. You cannot outdraw spontaneity. And when spontaneity occurs, as we will see, it doesn't just dwarf the universe. It celebrates the incredible exclamation point that the universe occurs and will have phenomenality because of the integral. It will have existentiality because of that integral. It will have a quality that leads to the development and developments and developments that finally there is a species like Homo sapiens sapiens, who gets the second sapiens in the name because some 40,000 years ago their dimension of quintessence, of being able to vision, was able to vision creatively enough to begin to produce art. And with a sixth dimension of art coming into play, art has this incredible ability to reach back through the open door of vision, back through the open gateway of vision, and prepare so that the doorway is able to be open to many and not just to one. Not just to a select few who are, what, accidents, mutants, geniuses? Art opens the portals, the gateway, by showing that it is not just a window, and it's certainly not a window that is glazed over with a backing of doctrine so that the window becomes a mirror. Because all doctrine, all ideology is a glazing on the window of vision, producing a mirror so that the mind only sees itself in what really is a doorway, what really is a window, what really is a gateway. Not just a cinematographic mirroring. In the Middle Ages, 1,000 years ago, most learned doctrine books were called speculum this or speculum that. Speculum is the mirror. One looks to see a poignant trigger once pulled in ancient China some 1,400 years ago, when a little kitchen boy named Hui Neg was washing the pots and pans in a monastic community headed by the great fifth patriarch, Matsu, and whose master of the monks' learning, Shenzi, was being prepared to receive the robe and the bowl as the empowering symbols of being the new sixth patriarch of the way in which enlightenment was being passed from lineage to lineage to lineage. And in order to receive that robe and that bowl, one expected that a special poetic quatrain would be written in the Chinese characters. And Shen Hui wrote that without a speck of dust on this mirror mind, one can see very clearly. Coming in the middle of the night morning from his chores. Weir, by this time, had learned to read and write, and he was an orphan. And he wrote under it with the little brush that he had and found some ink, and he wrote, "There is no mirror, wherever is there place where dust could collect." And getting up very early, Matsu saw Weir had written this, and when he read it, he brought him quickly into his room, gave him the robe and the bowl, and said, "Now get out of town, because they're all going to be after you, because you do not fit in any way into any order that they can understand and approve and live by. They will not be able to hear you except to ridicule that this is absurd. This is stupidity. This is kitchen boy, pot washer junk. But you are the sixth patriarch." And years and years and years later, when the six patriarchs' sudden, spontaneous awakening, not a doctrine, not just a technique, but a techne, was recognized by many, many thousands, he delivered what is called the Platform Sutra, which begins that the sixth patriarch came into the vast crowd and ascended the high chair, arranged his robes, and settled in to then speak. And he, in his sutra, it begins with friends and goes on to tell how he was born. His mother died. He was a beggar on the streets. He became a kitchen helper and finally ended up, and so on and so forth. It is, for the 600s AD, a time when Europe was in what used to be called appropriately the Dark Ages, because the entire classical learning, like a dome of doctrines, had collapsed and had left ruins that were incomprehensible, and with it were swept away incredible amounts of experience and heritage and understanding. But the high Dharma combing through way, Parayana, is able now to discern quite accurately that that high learning had been sabotaged many times before, and so had not, even by the time of about 500 AD, when the collapse actually happened, it was already a collapse of a false structure, and that's why it collapsed. One of the most poignant qualities after the travesty of World War II, right at the closure, two great discoveries happened at the same time, almost as if they were like a tuned pair. In Egypt, along one of the cliff sides of the Middle Nile, near a village called Nag Hammadi, a group of 7 leather folder parchment documents were found, and that is the Nag Hammadi Library that is now world famous. And the other was the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in a cave by the ancient Qumran monastery, that was abandoned in 31 BC because of an immense earthquake that split like a lightning cleaver the stairwell leading down to the baptismal pool of cleansingness for the whole community. And to them, it was an apocalyptic reminder that what they were doing had a fracture in it and was not true. Had come close, but not only no cigar, no more community. No more, because the room enough for a false structure had collapsed. We live at the beginning of 2014 where the false structure has collapsed and it's now apparent. And so what is being presented is not a new teaching, it's not a new ideology. My goodness, it is the Parayana that we have been accumulating for a very, very long time, since time itself began. Because helping that zero field emerge spontaneously into an integral, an infinite field cooperates with it and braids together with it, that at the very same time and before there is time, a differential conscious field is playing with the integral egg of the feminine space-time, and this way a cosmos invisibly is always a part of the universe, which is phenomenal, existential, material, ideational, and is only real because of dimensions of consciousness that freely dance and interplay, bringing the aesthetics of beauty and the analytics of truthfulness into a quality which is like a third field, and that is the field of the real. We're looking at something which is startling because it has not ever been seen except by a very few at the beginnings of where this was first realized, seen, visioned, understood, delivered, and presented. One of the most peculiar qualities is to recognize that there are precursors, and as the event horizon, as the threshold of emergence comes to be, the preludes condense. And as they condense, they also condense with an increased differential conscious energy. And so the time itself becomes time itself. Time herself becomes pregnant with meaning, with dimensions of vision and art, moving into history, into science, into the great complementarity. And when we come back, we'll take a look at a couple of figures who 2,000 years ago were extraordinarily important. One of them is a mysterious figure that no one knows his name. He is called in the Dead Sea Scrolls the teacher of righteousness. The other figure is a figure who is well known but has the most mysterious quality of life to him. His name was Ovid, P. Ovidius Naso. And Ovid was, after Virgil and Horace had died, the greatest poet, the greatest writer in the Roman Empire, and he so offended Augustus Caesar that Augustus Caesar personally banished him to the